I help you?
Yes, my son-in-law called. He was playing golf this morning at 9:30. My daughter's been missing since this morning. She's 8 months pregnant. She took her dog for a walk in the park. The dog came home with just a leash on.
And the dog came back without your daughter?
Right.
I was working for a local station in the San Francisco Bay Area, and we were dispatched down to Modesto to go cover this missing pregnant lady story. And I remember going up to the house, where Scott and Laci were living with their dog Mackenzie, and knocking on the door, and Scott comes out, and he doesn't want to be on television. And this was, to me, was so bizarre because most people who have a missing loved one are screaming for attention. Please help us find our loved one. That wasn't the case with him. He was the direct opposite, said, please don't show me, gave us a flyer and kind of shoot us on our way. Now, did he do that because he had a girlfriend, which we of course didn't know about at the time, or what? And then suspicion starts to center around Scott. And then Amber Fry enters the picture.
Suspicion that it's been turned to me. And it turned to me because of the inappropriate romantic that I had with Amber Fry.
Laci Peterson and her unborn son disappeared just before Christmas 2002. Their bodies found in San Francisco Bay a few months later. Scott Peterson is currently serving a life sentence for the murders.
But now a group that focuses on wrongful convictions is taking on his case.
The Innocence Project is honing in on this burglary that happened across the street from Laci and Scott's home.
This filing, Scott Peterson says he contacted the Los Angeles Innocence Project in July of last year. They took his case and filed a massive motion with exhibits. The Innocence Project's filings on behalf of Scott Peterson totaled 1,524 pages, including a motion for post-conviction discovery with a claim of actual innocence that is supported by newly discovered evidence. I asked Scott Peterson's sister-in-law, Janie Peterson, whether she sees this as a real shot at a new trial. Absolutely, she texted, or solving the crime and Scott being released. The Peterson family credits Mike Gudgell, a journalist who used to work for ABC News, with tracking down new evidence.
The verdict was unsatisfactory. I was really conflicted about the case because there's never any explanation of really what happened to Laci. It was really a mystery.
The Innocence Project motion asks for evidence not previously provided to the defense, police interviews with witnesses, photographs, videos, and tips that law enforcement failed to track down.
Any doubt in your mind as an investigator on this case that Scott Peterson did not kill Laci and Connor?
Not one doubt at all. I haven't had a doubt since the jury came back. I didn't have a doubt before the jury came back. When we put the case together, it was put together like most premeditated murder investigations are, as a circumstantial case, because premeditated murder doesn't usually provide you the luxury of a witness or a videotape.
The Innocence Project filings focus on a burglary at the home directly across the street from the Petersons' house that same week. They want video of interviews conducted by Modesto police with 2 men involved in the burglary. One of them reportedly said Laci witnessed him breaking into the house. They want to find out if a van that was found torched near the Modesto airport is connected to the burglary. Inside, investigators discovered a mattress with stains confirmed to be blood. The Innocence Project wants to conduct new DNA tests on those samples. Could it be Laci Peterson's blood?
That van, as it turns out, it was on this dirt pathway, this alleyway that goes, in between these rows of the backs of homes. And it turns out that one of those homes, the back fence, belongs to a family member of one of the burglars. Is it connected? That's what the Los Angeles Innocence Project is looking to find out.
The filing also mentions a witness who says he saw a pregnant woman fitting Laci's description who appeared to be under duress getting into a van on Scenic Road.
I think there's enough evidence that it's probable that someone else may have committed the crime. Enough evidence for law enforcement to investigate further.
They also want more information to help track the trail of a Croton watch that may have been Laci Peterson's, pawned the week after she disappeared. The filings claim Modesto police did not fully follow up on reports that Laci was spotted walking her golden retriever after the time Scott Peterson says he went fishing at 9:30 that morning. Lead Innocence Project attorney Paula Mitchell writes that she has encountered witnesses who feared coming forward because the case is too high profile.
This was like no other case at the time because the country was absolutely fascinated by this. They wanted to see it to the end, and there were so many people that hated Scott Peterson to the core. It added this element that was very rare, and it has only happened a few times really over the last couple decades in terms of the general public being dialed into a case.
I wasn't the last one to see Laci that day. There were so many witnesses who saw her walking in the neighborhood after I left. The cops just never followed up on the burglar across the street. The police failed to find my family.
What concerns me the most is the fact that your dog came home with a leash on. That bothers me. I mean, no question.
Hello, for those who don't know me, my name is Tara Marie, and welcome to my channel, True Crime Matters, where we talk about and analyze everything true crime. This video is part of a series of videos in which I break down and analyze the 450-page plus motion that was just made public and submitted to the court by the LA Innocence Project on behalf of Scott Peterson. So if you haven't seen part 1 and part 2 yet of this series, I highly suggest you go back and start there and then come back here. I'll post the links down below so you can easily find them. But for today, I am just going to read declarations by 2 very important individuals who have signed these declarations in relation to new evidence that was found in support of Scott Peterson's claim of actual innocence. The declarations are by a senior investigative journalist named George Michael Gudgell and former Modesto Fire Department investigator Bryan Spitulski. I'm going to start with George Michael's declaration first, and here it is. I am a senior investigative journalist, recently retired as a producer at ABC News. I have over 40 years of experience as an investigative journalist and have been deeply involved in investigating a wide range of issues in a broad spectrum of cases. I have held postings in Los Angeles, London, Moscow, Iraq, Kuwait, and Kabul. I was a manager and gatekeeper with ABC to help guide coverage and help determine the content of news stories that ABC chose to cover. I was also the ABC bureau chief in Iraq and a producer in Afghanistan during the time the U.S. military was engaged in hostilities in those countries. I have a great deal of experience investigating serious felony cases and high-profile cases, including the Oklahoma City bombing, space shuttle disaster, missing Malaysian airliner, and criminal cases involving Chandra Levy and JonBenet Ramsey. I have been fortunate in that I have received a number of awards for my work as an investigative reporter. Of the many murder cases I have covered and investigations in my career, the media coverage of Laci Peterson's disappearance was by far the most intense and disruptive I have ever experienced. The concept of the 24-hour news cycle was still relatively new in 2002, and there was a great deal of pressure to fill the airtime. As a result, there were many networks and media outlets competing for breaking news stories. Programs like CNN's Nancy Grace were airing almost daily coverage of the investigation into Laci's disappearance as it unfolded, with commentary that was not always accurate or supported by any actual evidence. The intensity of the coverage and the public's interest in the case was exasperated by the advent of the internet, which made it possible to constantly disseminate the inaccurate commentary and false narratives reported by the tabloid media to a vast audience with lightning speed. I began investigating the evidence in the case involving the disappearance and murder of Laci Peterson in December of 2002, and I was on the scene in Modesto a few days after Laci disappeared. I coordinated ABC News coverage of the trial and sentencing proceedings. And he writes, I recall reaching out to defense investigator Gary Imonian in May of 2003, not long after Mr. Peterson was arrested, in an effort to obtain reliable information about the case. I was frustrated by the fact that cable news shows were rebroadcasting tabloid reports that were not based on reliable facts or reliable reporting. The email below expresses the frustration I experienced as I was trying to find accurate, reliable information about the investigation into what happened to Laci Peterson. And this shows an email down below that Mike had actually written in May of 2003 to investigator Imonian, in which he wrote, I am a producer for ABC News. I'm in charge of making sure everything we report is accurate, both in fact and context. As you can imagine, the Laci Peterson story has been challenging. It is particularly difficult when the cable news shows rebroadcast tabloid reports. Our broadcast producers see all of this and wonder why I can't confirm similar details. I am not going to ask, but as an investigator, you probably know more about this case and Scott. So when you see something that is pure fiction that you want to throw your shoe at the TV and feel compelled to set the record straight, please give me a call. There may be a time when you can, at least, reveal what isn't true. It's a very interesting way of getting on the good side of an investigator. I really appreciate that about this guy. In my discussions with other journalists who were covering the case in depth at the trial as I was, I learned that most were conflicted about the jury's verdict, given the evidence presented. Contrary to what I saw widely and falsely reported by the tabloid media and cable news shows at the time, I saw no direct forensic or biological evidence supporting Mr. Peterson's guilt presented at the trial, and my own investigation uncovered important leads to other suspects I believe were not adequately pursued. In fact, much of the coverage I saw was incorrect and or misleading. My investigation into Laci Peterson's disappearance has been fairly steady over the last 21 years, and it continues to this day. Investigative steps I have taken include reaching out to members of law enforcement, family members, and witnesses in the area, submitting Public Record Act requests, and conducting hundreds of interviews with witnesses, attorneys, experts, individuals with background knowledge of the Modesto Police Department, the Stanislaus County District Attorney's Office, and other law enforcement agencies involved in the investigation into who killed Laci and Connor Peterson. Over the course of my career as an investigative journalist, I have interviewed hundreds of witnesses from a variety of backgrounds in various and often very difficult circumstances. Integrity in reporting is essential to the truth-seeking function that lies at the heart of investigative journalism. My training and expertise have endowed me with an understanding that is important not to take claims or witness statements at face value, but to instead confirm claims and statements with corroborating evidence. In the course of my investigation in this case, I conducted considerable research and interviewed numerous witnesses in an effort to verify and provide support and corroboration for new information and facts I was able to uncover before reaching any conclusions of my own. My own investigation uncovered exculpatory evidence that supports Mr. Peterson's claim that he is innocent, which appears to me was never investigated by law enforcement. Attorneys from Los Angeles Innocence Project contacted me July of 2023 and informed me that they were preparing to file a motion for DNA testing on certain items of evidence and a post-conviction discovery motion in an effort to further investigate Scott Peterson's claim of innocence and what may have happened to Laci and Connor Peterson. They explained that they were investigating recently uncovered evidence that pointed to other possible suspects in the case. I agreed to speak with them regarding some of the information I have uncovered in my own investigation. We agreed I would not reveal the names of any sources who spoke to me off the record and or asked to remain anonymous. I was specifically asked to discuss possible exculpatory evidence my investigation uncovered and issues around the physical items of evidence that could be subjected to DNA testing, including evidence collected from the orange van that was found on fire approximately 1 mile from the Petersons' home on December 25, 2002, the morning after Laci disappeared, and which was the subject of an inadequate fire investigation, in my opinion. I was also asked to address what I uncovered when I investigated the date the home of Rudy and Susan Medina was burglarized. Now, this section he titles, "The Medina Home was burglarized on December 24th, 2002, and he goes into it. My investigation revealed that there were a number of people involved in planned burglaries in the La Loma neighborhood around the Christmas holiday in 2002. There was coordination among several individuals who were carrying out these burglaries, including scouts looking for police, looking for evidence of vacant homes by counting cars and driveways, and looking for things like uncollected mail and or newspapers. My investigation also revealed evidence that there were more than 2 individuals involved in burglarizing the Medina's home, and that it took place over more than a day. Evidence I have gathered in the course of my own investigation, combined with evidence gathered during the police investigation, indicates to me that the Medina's home was burglarized on December 24th, 2002, after Mr. Peterson left for the day. Diane Jackson told police she saw 3 men and a van parked in front of the Medina's home on December 24th at approximately 11:40 a.m. Mrs. Jackson was not permitted to testify at trial, however, because the Modesto police detectives responsible for investigating the case opted to place Ms. Jackson under hypnosis for an official interview, and the individual who hypnotized her was not qualified to do so in an official capacity, so thus her testimony was deemed inadmissible. I interviewed Diane Jackson, and she confirmed to me that she still recalls the events of that day and that all of the statements she provided to police were true and accurate, i.e., the day she saw the van parked in front of the Medina's home with the 3 men standing around it was on December 24th at about 11:40 a.m. I also interviewed Linda Chiles, who was herself the widow of a Modesto Police Department detective named Nick Chiles. Ms. Chiles confirmed to me that she reported to police in December of 2002 that on the morning of December 24, 2002, she was driving on Covina and saw a suspicious-looking van parked in front of the Medina's home with 3 men standing around it. When I spoke to her, she informed me that no one from the Modesto Police Department ever contacted her to follow up with her report. I interviewed Susan Medina, who told me she reported to police that the morning of December 24th, as she and her husband were leaving town for the holiday, they saw a man on a bike coming down their street as they were about to drive away. The man looked out of place and caused Mr. Medina enough concern that he drove around the block to make sure the man had moved along and was not still lurking around his home. Mrs. Medina stated that the police never asked her if she could identify the man she had seen on a bike that morning. Both Rudy and Susan Medina also told me that the safe that was stolen from their home was far too heavy for one person to carry alone, and that it would likely require 3 people to lift and move it. Based on reports I have reviewed, Stephen Todd himself, who pleaded guilty to committing the burglary, was unclear about the date he burglarized the Medina's home. First, Todd told police in his initial interview, upon arrest, that he burglarized the house on the morning of December 27th, which isn't possible at all, given that the Medinas had returned home the day earlier and reported the burglary to the police on the 26th. Then, realizing December 27th burglary was not possible, Todd changed his story again and told police that he committed the burglary in the early morning hours of December 26th. However, as I reported by my colleagues, by the morning of December 26th, there was already a heavy media presence on Covina Avenue covering the disappearance of Laci Peterson, making it an unlikely time to commit a burglary on that street. Covina is a small, intimate street with homes that are relatively close to each other. Based on my own experience of being present with other reporters on the street where the Petersons and Medina's homes are located, it is difficult to believe a burglary of the Medina's home on December 26th could have gone unnoticed. I interviewed Stephen Todd's co-defendant, Donald Glenn Pierce, on numerous occasions prior to his death. Pierce also pleaded guilty to the Medina burglary. He told police he was awakened by Todd between 6:30 and 7 a.m. on December 26th, who was asking him to help Todd retrieve property from the Medina residence. That would place Todd and Pierce on Covina Avenue on or after 7 a.m. on December 26th. Again, that account is very difficult to believe because the video news reports from that morning demonstrate that news media was recording as early as 7:02 a.m. on December 26th, as indicated by the screenshot of Ted Rowland's report below. And here you can see he's actually showing in his declaration a screenshot of the Ted Rowland's report directly from Covina Ave the morning of December 26th, when Todd and Pierce claim they had burglarized the Medina home. He continues, in my experience, for a news team to be broadcasting live at 7 a.m. from Covina Avenue, they would have to have arrived there an hour or more earlier for staging in order to set up lights, set up their satellite news vans, and test their cables and microphones for the broadcast. Given the media presence on Covina Avenue on December 26th, it is not plausible, in my opinion, that the burglary occurred on December 26th as Todd and Pierce reported. If Todd and Pierce were able to remove the safe for the Medina home the morning of December 26th, as they had claimed, it does not explain how, when, and by whom the remaining 50 or so items stolen from the Medina's home were removed, which included other very large items like a large tool chest and gardening equipment, among other items. The more plausible scenario, based on my investigation and eyewitness accounts, of there being a van parked in front of the Medina home with the three men standing around it on the morning of December 24th, 2002, is that there were multiple people in and out of the Medina's home beginning on December 24th, including Todd himself, and possibly continuing through the morning of December 26th, if that is a fact when Todd and Pierce moved the safe. Stephen Todd told police that he was with Cliff Cohen on December 24, 2002, and that he was not on Covina Avenue at all that day. As proof, he did not commit the burglary on that date. In 2015, I interviewed Telesia Cohen, Cliff Cohen's daughter. Telesia Cohen told me that in December of 2002, she was living in the airport district at 612 Thrasher, and that she is the sister of Melissa McDaniels, who was the mother of Stephen Todd Jr., Stephen Todd's son. The location of Telesia Cohen's home is directly adjacent to an alley where a van was set on fire the early morning of December 25, 2002, addressed below. My investigation uncovered evidence that the police did not investigate Todd's account about where he went and what he did during the 3-day period when the Medinas were away between December 24th and December 26th. On October 26, 2015, I spoke to Detective Stowe of the Modesto Police Department, who led the investigation into the Medina burglary. I specifically asked him about statements he had made at a press conference on January 3, 2003, confirming that Todd and Pierce had been cleared of any involvement in Laci Peterson's disappearance. When I asked him about what efforts were made to verify Stephen Todd's alibi for December 24th, the day that Laci went missing, Stowe told me they didn't check where Stephen Todd was that day, that he expected Todd would not tell the truth. He said, "You expect that kind of stuff from criminals. It's expected. And all these jailhouse snitches and all these other people, you know, meth addicts can be, they will tell themselves lies enough that they will truly, truly believe it." I asked Detective Stowe if anyone checked the address that Todd provided to the police as part of his alibi, and he told me that they did not know. My investigation showed that the address Todd provided as his alibi had flooded and was inhabitable, empty, and dilapidated in December of 2002. Sources told me that Stephen Todd was a daily user of METH and other drugs. Todd himself admitted during his police interview on January 3, 2003, that he was a daily drug user. And according to a sworn declaration I reviewed by an investigator for the defense that was signed in 2015, Todd admitted to him in 2004 that he was, quote, so high on METH and crack for 3 days that he didn't remember anything he did during the 2-day period from December 24th through December 26th. Based on my review of the evidence and my own independent follow-up investigation, there appears to be no reliable sources of information supporting the prosecution's theory the Medina's home was not burglarized on December 24th and was instead burglarized on December 26th. My investigation uncovered additional evidence supporting Detective Stowe's admission that the MPD did not investigate the reliability of Todd's statements to police. For example, Todd told police that on December 25th, he was visiting his kids at a house on Tioga 16 Drive, where his kids were then living. My research revealed, however, that the residence Todd was describing was that of his ex-wife, Elizabeth Garcia, located at 1131 Tioga Drive. Property records associated with that address indicate that Todd's ex-wife and kids no longer lived at that address in December of 2002 because that area of Modesto had experienced severe flooding and the residence was abandoned. It therefore appears to me that the police never looked into the reliability of Stephen Todd's alibi for December 25th, which was false. I have reviewed the content of a statement sent to Scott Peterson in 2012 or 2013 by an individual named Danny Chapman. Chapman apparently stated to Mr. Peterson that he was in custody at the Modesto Security Center together with a person I will identify as DM, who knew Stephen Todd. Chapman reported to Scott that 1, Todd told DM he had been burglarizing homes in the neighborhood where the Petersons and Medina lived in December of 2002, and 2, Todd told DM that when he was committing the burglary, Todd believed Laci saw him, so he called DM and asked for a ride so he could get everything out of the house before Laci could call the police. Danny Chapman also informed Mr. Peterson that DM told him that, quote, Todd and company abducted Laci, but he did not provide details about when or where or how he knew that information. I was unsuccessful in my attempts to locate Danny Chapman to interview him over several years, and now he is deceased. To investigate the reliability of Mr. Chapman's statements to Mr. Peterson, I independently investigated the information he provided by personally contacting DM in 2015. DM confirmed to me that Todd called him from inside the Medina home and asked him to come assist with getting the things that he was stealing out of the Medina's home because he needed to do it fast. DM also confirmed that the call from Todd came on the day of Christmas Eve, or December 24th. DM confirmed that he knew Danny Chapman, and he asked how he was doing. In 2019, I exchanged letters with Ralph Gorella when he was in prison. I had heard from several sources that Ralph was a confidential informant and the person who called the police and reported that Stephen Todd was responsible for the burglary. Ralph did not deny the rumors. Based on the information I uncovered in my years-long investigation into the date the Medina's home was burglarized, I have concluded: 1, the police never confirmed the truthfulness of the burglars' alibis for December 24th to ensure they were truthful, and 2, there is evidence there were multiple burglaries that were carried out by several different individuals, beginning on December 24th, and 3, there is no credible or reliable evidence supporting the prosecution's claim that the burglary was not committed on December 24th, but was instead committed on December 26th and only December 26th. Now, this next section he calls Orange Caltrans Van in La Loma Park on December 24, 2002, and he writes, "In 2003, I was investigating a report I had come across about a van that had been set on fire in the airport district early Christmas morning, December 25, 2002, just hours after Laci Peterson was discovered missing. The van was set on fire while parked in an alley behind the home of Telesia Cohen, the aunt of Stephen Todd Jr. One of the individuals who investigated the fire was MFD fire investigator Bryan Spitulski, so I contacted him in 2015. When I explained to Mr. Spitulski that I wanted to ask him questions about the burned van he investigated around the time that Laci Peterson went missing, he stated that he had been waiting for over 10 years for someone to come and ask him about that. Mr. Spitulski explained that the vehicle fire involved an orange 1989 Chevrolet van with a mattress in the back, license plate number 6S66512, and that his examination of the vehicle conducted that the fire was intentionally set. After I interviewed Mr. Spitulski, it appeared to me that there was information missing in the police reports I had obtained. There were no police reports indicating there had been an investigation into the burned van. I showed Mr. Spitulski the reports I had available to me, and he stated that he believed there should be more investigational reports and photographs than what I'd shown him. Mr. Spitulski told me that in his examination of the vehicle and its contents, he saw that the mattress in the rear passenger area had visible red-brown staining on a portion that was unburned. He recalled that a presumptive test using luminol or similar chemical was conducted on a cutting from the stained area of the mattress, and it showed to be presumptive positive for the presence of blood. He stated that he was not aware that Laci Peterson was missing at the time he responded to the fire the morning of December 25, 2002. But by the time the van was taken into the police custody to be examined for evidence, he and all of law enforcement were aware of a possible connection between the van and Laci Peterson's disappearance. Mr. Spitulski expressed that given the proximity, both in terms of time and location, of the discovery of the van with Laci Peterson's disappearance, coupled with the fact that the fire was intentionally set, perhaps for the purpose of covering up a crime, he was concerned and bothered by the failure to fully investigate its potential link to her disappearance. I noticed a reference in one of the police reports to 6 color photos that were reportedly checked into MPD evidence, so I began making an effort to obtain those photos. I contacted some of my sources in law enforcement asking if anyone could help me obtain the photos and other information about the orange van. In late 2015 or early 2016, a source who asked me to remain anonymous sent me the 6 photos below, and he has the photos here. I later provided a copy of these photos to a member of Mr. Peterson's legal team because I was having medical issues and I wanted to ensure that the information I had was known to the defense and could be made a part of the record so it would be complete. When I was investigating the orange van in 2003, I learned that the registered owner of the van was Terry Borden, so I contacted him at his property on Service Road and asked to interview him. I was immediately struck by the obvious criminal element present on his property. I recall seeing a number of men and women there with obvious gang tattoos who were employees of Borden's Moving and Rigging. While I was made to feel unwelcome by several employees on the property, the owner did agree to speak with me. When I asked him about his van that was stolen and set on fire in Christmas of 2002, Borden indicated that it was an inside job, meaning that one of his own employees had stolen the vehicle. This struck me as significant in that if the van was taken by one of Borden's own employees, the logical reason for setting the van on fire would be to destroy evidence in it in order to cover up a crime it was used in the commission of, since if evidence inside of it were to be discovered, it could easily be linked back to one of the employees. I later learned that a man named Philip Lout was part of the criminal network associated with the burglaries in La Loma, including Todd and others I suspected may have been involved in the Medina burglary. I learned that Lout was the son-in-law of Terry Borden. I attempted to interview Lout, but was unable to do so. He is now in prison in Oklahoma, and Lout is deceased. In 2017, after learning more about the orange van that was intentionally set on fire in the airport district on December 25, 2002, and reviewing a police report documenting an interview with Mike Gudgell, who told police on December 26, 2002 that 2 days earlier, on the morning of December 24, 2002, he was out running in East La Loma Park and recalled seeing an orange Caltrans Blazer-type vehicle parked near the tennis courts. I contacted Mr. Gudgell and interviewed him. I asked Mr. Gudgell if he recalled reporting that he had seen a 15-year-old Blazer-type vehicle with square headlights that resembled an old Caltrans vehicle in Loma Park the morning of December 24th. Mr. Gudgell immediately stated, "Oh, that creepy van. That gave me bad vibes." He did not describe the vehicle as a Blazer, but instead as a van. He said there were 3 men that he described as gangbangers around the van. When recalling the van, he displayed a physical reaction to the memory of the van, unconsciously mimicking both fear and shock. I found his reaction to be very authentic and believable, as if he was having a visceral reaction to the memory, as if it was coming back to him. I asked Mr. Gudgell where in the park he saw the van, and he explained that it was near the tennis courts on the east end of the park. The map below depicts the location of the van as indicated by Mr. Gudgell, and then here we see a picture of that. Mr. Gudgell told me that no one from the police department ever contacted him to follow up on his report about seeing the orange van in the park. Based on my experience and the result of my 21-year-long investigation into this case, I am surprised that law enforcement did not do more to investigate the evidence recovered from the orange van that was set on fire in the airport district and possible related crimes. In my investigation into that crime, I was unable to uncover any evidence indicating that Modesto Police Department made a serious effort to make any arrest in that crime, or even find suspects who may have been involved or others with knowledge of the crime or circumstances surrounding that crime. Nor did police investigate whether the orange van had a possible connection to the abduction of Laci Peterson and or use of any other crimes. In my view, the van's link to criminal elements in the community and the timing and circumstances of its discovery in relation to the disappearance of Laci Peterson leave a lot of unanswered questions that law enforcement investigators failed to pursue. I also reviewed police records detailing the immediate efforts undertaken to locate Laci after she was reported missing, including the use of scent dogs to trail her scent. My review of those scent dog reports indicates to me that the scent trail detected by Merlin, the bloodhound handled by Cotrona-Costa County Sheriff's Department Reserve Officer Cindy Valentine, went from the Petersons' home in the direction of the airport district, not far from 1406 Tenya, where Todd and Pierce lived and where they were both arrested. Both admitted to committing the Medina burglary. The trail Merlin followed also ended very close to the homes of other suspects I believe may have been involved in the Medina burglary. I personally walked the route where Cindy Valentine documented her dog Merlin had trailed Laci Peterson's scent. I observed that a few blocks further east from where Merlin was told to stop trailing is where the burned orange van was located, in the alleyway behind Thrasher. Valentine testified that Merlin lost the scent and she stopped the search at the Gallo parking lot. Based on my review of Mr. Peterson's statement to police, he left home the morning of December 24th and drove west to his office, but Merlin did not trail Laci's scent in the direction of the route Mr. Peterson reported taking to his office and warehouse the morning of December 24, 2002. Instead, the trail went south toward the airport district area, toward the area where Todd, Pierce, and others I suspect were involved in the Medina burglary lived and where the burned van was located. Depicted below is a map indicating the route Scott told police he took to the office. And in blue, Laci's scent trail Merlin picked up on December is in red. So in blue, he has Scott's line, and then in red, he has Merlin's line. I walked the route indicated in red below and was struck by how, although the trails led to the airport district, law enforcement ignored this evidence, even though it tended to corroborate the connection between the burglary, the burned van, and Laci's disappearance. Based on my decades of experience, and as an investigative journalist, and my independent investigation into the facts and evidence of this case, it does not appear that the MPD conducted a meaningful investigation into the date of the Medina burglary, whether Stephen Todd saw Laci Peterson the morning of December 24th, after Mr. Peterson left home for the day, or the orange van possibly being connected to Laci's disappearance and murder. As a result, the jury did not hear any evidence concerning the burned van, nor did the jury hear there were possible bloodstains observed on the mattress in the back of the burned van, or that the orange van was observed at the park the morning she disappeared, or that the following day the orange van fitting the same description was found on fire at a location not far from where Todd lived, or that Merlin traced Laci's scent in the direction of the neighborhood where Todd lived, as well as others I suspect were involved in the Medina burglary and where the orange van was located the morning after Laci disappeared. And then he has in this section 8 eyewitnesses who reported seeing Laci Peterson and Mackenzie on December 24, 2002. I interviewed the following eyewitnesses who reported to the police that they had seen Laci Peterson walking a dog in the La Loma neighborhood the morning of December 24th, or in some instances, the witnesses saw only the Petersons' dog, Mackenzie, without Laci, but whose reports were not seriously investigated or, in some instances, not investigated at all. In 2013, Leora Garcia reported to me she saw a tan van pulled over along the curb at La Loma Park entrance, not far from where other eyewitnesses reported seeing Laci Peterson walking that morning. The van's tires squealed, and then the van pulled away and the door was shut quickly, leaving a quilted coat or blanket sticking out of the door. Mrs. Garcia told me that she also saw a dog that fit the descriptions of the Petersons' dog dragging a red leash, but with no one else around. Leorna struck me as a very reliable witness because she seemed to pay great attention to detail. She was a driving instructor at the time, and she was in a car with a student driver, so her primary duty at the time, she observed, what she reported was to be surveying the surroundings to ensure her student driver was not heading toward harm. I found Mrs. Garcia to be very credible. In 2015, Victoria Pouches also reported to police that she had seen a dog fitting the description of the Petersons' dog when she was jogging in Loma Park the morning of December 24, 2002. When I interviewed Mrs. Pouches, I asked her if she was certain it was the Petersons' dog she saw that morning, and she stated that she was certain. I spent several years trying to track down John Brazil, a man who worked for the City Parks Department and who was in and around Loma Park every day. He was in Loma Park on December 24th because some kids asked him to put nets up on the basketball courts on his day off, and he agreed to do so. He reported to police that he saw a golden lab dragging its leash go by with a woman he thought was pregnant following. I was finally able to interview Mr. Brazil by telephone in 2016. I asked him if he believed the woman was Laci Peterson, and he stated that he knew the Rochas, and specifically knew Laci and Brent Rocha because they were involved in student activities when they were younger. Mr. Brazil told me the woman he saw with the dog on December 24th very well could have been Laci. He said, "In my gut, I believe it was Laci." In 2013, I interviewed Gene Pedrioli, who reported to the police that he had seen Laci Peterson walking a dog near the park entrance at Edgebrook and Loma, which is a location I knew was near where other witnesses reported seeing Laci that morning. Mr. Pedrioli told me Laci was having trouble controlling the dog, and she had kind of a scared look on her face. When Mr. Pedrioli saw the news and the photo of Laci reporting that she was missing and that no one had seen her since December 23rd, he went to the police station to report that he had seen her walking her dog the morning of December 24th. He told me the police were not interested in hearing what he had to say, so he left and did not go back. I reviewed an email dated February 2nd, 2003 that Mr. Pedrioli's co-worker sent to the email address that was set up to help find Laci Peterson, stating that Mr. Pedrioli attempted to report what he had seen to the police, but no one seemed to be interested in hearing it. Mr. Pedrioli is now deceased. The email is below, and he has this email attached where somebody saw Laci in the park, and he wasn't taken seriously by police. And it's just like this frustrated email that nobody was taking him seriously. And then the final section here I'm going to read is an interesting one. Trial prosecutor Flanagan and MPD lead detective Craig Grogan. And we heard about this in section 1 of this video series. And it says, because Mr. Peterson's trial was moved from Modesto in Redwood City, both trial teams had to try the case away from home. The prosecution team and law enforcement witnesses tended to stay at one hotel, the Marriott Residence Inn, while the defense team stayed at other hotels. I was hopeful to establish a relationship with the prosecution and detectives, so I purposefully stayed at the Marriott Residence Inn. Over the 6 months I was staying at the hotel, I frequently saw prosecutor Birgit Flanagan and Detective Craig Grogan together apart from others. I noticed interactions between them that appeared to be progressively familiar, such as unnecessary touching and smiling, than what one typically sees among professional colleagues. The interactions I observed appeared to become more and more obvious over time. At some point, I started noticing similar interactions in court. I heard other detectives speculating as to why Grogan was staying at the hotel away from home for months. Later, towards the end of the trial, I was told by colleagues that there were rumors they had a romantic relationship. I later confirmed with a person who had personal knowledge of the affair between Flanagan and Grogan, and the two were engaged in an extramarital affair, and that some of Detective Grogan's friends and colleagues were actually concerned about how the affair was affecting him personally and emotionally. I have reviewed this declaration in its entirety, and it is accurate to the best of my knowledge. To me, I really don't think this, award-winning, highly accomplished investigative journalist would be just doing this for clout or money or something. Not to mention, I've noticed that anyone that ever tries to even suggest that Scott Peterson maybe didn't get a fair trial or might be innocent is completely attacked by the public. So it surely is something that appears Mike is doing out of passion for wanting to spread more truth that he investigated and believes to be true. And just going by his personality, even from way back in 2003 when he emailed the investigator in the case about how he was seeing so many false reports that he couldn't corroborate, I mean, it shows that he places a huge emphasis on truth, evidence, and ethical reporting. I also wanted to point something out that wasn't mentioned in Mike's report, but something that I stumbled on that I really wonder if it's accurate and if it is connected to this case, and I wonder if we'll ever know. Now, when I read Mike's recount of trying to interview the business owner of the orange van that was stolen, he also revealed that Terry Borden's truck company was called Borden's Moving and Rigging. Now, I didn't really know what rigging meant, so I had to literally Google it, but it apparently has something to do with trucks, transporting heavy equipment. I think there's big construction type trucks. Now, at trial, at the original trial, the defense theory was that someone else dumped Laci's body. And there was talk about this Target bag that was found with duct tape on it in the location near the bodies. Now, this isn't like the Target retail company that you're probably thinking of right now. It's actually a different company. In fact, at trial, the owner of this Target company testified that they were a Canadian company called Target Products that used these bags to wrap building materials for shipping. Now, Modesto police had discovered that that company had used similar bags during an ongoing construction project on the Richmond Bridge that was also very close to where Laci and Connor's bodies were found. Initially, in the confidential report, Detective Brochini noted that, quote, "It is unknown at this time if this bag has any connection to the deceased female or infant." Now, lo and behold, one of the very items that the Innocence Project wants tested, because I don't think it was ever tested, curiously, before, is this Target bag that was found near the bodies with this duct tape wrapped around it. Now, to me, this is like bombshell type information that if that Target bag has anything to do with this case and it connects to that Borden Trucking Company employee who was maybe working a construction type job at that Richmond Bridge and also worked at Terry Borden's company, this is a huge deal if there's another trial. There is more physical evidence here than the state ever had with Scott Peterson himself. In that same vein, let's move on to the declaration about the van by Bryan Spitulski, and he writes, "I am currently employed as a principal consultant specializing in fire investigations with Invista Forensics. I have over 20 years of experience in fire investigations. From 1999 to 2003, I was employed with the Modesto Fire Department as a fire investigator. In July of 2023, I was contacted by the attorneys with the Los Angeles Innocence Project. They explained that they were investigating a vehicle fire that I had investigated, which occurred around the time of the investigation into the disappearance of Laci Peterson. I agreed to speak with them regarding what I remembered." And then it says, this section is called 612 Thrasher Ave. On December 25th, 2002, I was contacted around 8:30 a.m. regarding a vehicle fire in the Airport District area of Modesto. At this time, Modesto, and particularly the area of Airport District, was notorious for vehicle thefts and fires. Over the years, I had responded to several fires involving Molotov cocktails, or fires classified as attempted murders reported in the airport district of Modesto. At the time I responded to the call, I was unaware of the missing person investigation into Laci Peterson, who had been reported missing the prior evening. When I arrived at the scene, the fire had been extinguished and the vehicle was still slightly smoking. The vehicle was facing south in an alleyway located near Thrasher Avenue and Empire Avenue, north of Larkin Avenue. The fire engine that responded to the scene prior to my arrival approached from the north end of the alleyway. I approached from the south. The blue pin on the map below depicts the vehicle's approximate location, and then it has the location there. It says the vehicle was an orange 1989 Chevrolet van. The van is depicted in the photograph below. As a fire investigator on the scene, my role was to determine the origin and cause of the fire. I recall consulting with Captain Jolly, who informed me that there were no witnesses around, but that a neighbor had called the fire in. He further informed me that the decision to call in a fire investigator was in part based on the fact that a rag was sticking out of the fuel tank. Although this did not appear to be the origin of the fire, it did tend to indicate the fire was intentionally set and therefore warranted an investigation. I recall speaking with the reporting party who resided at 612 Thrasher Avenue. The reporting party informed me that they did not recognize the van being present in the alleyway when they went to sleep the night before. Aside from speaking to the reporting party, we did not conduct any further canvass of the neighborhood for witnesses to the fire. This was in part due to the timing of the fire based on Christmas morning, and also due to the location of the fire in the airport district, a neighborhood notorious for crime. Based upon my observations and my experience and expertise, I opined that this van was an incendiary fire, meaning that it was intentionally set and not the result of natural causes. I based this conclusion in part on evidence of two separate points and correspondence of burn patterns, one in the front of the vehicle and one in the rear cabin, which indicated that the fire was set in at least two locations in or on the vehicle. I also observed that the gas cap of the fuel tank was lying on the ground near the vehicle, and a rag had been placed into the opening for the fuel tank and was hanging down to the side of the vehicle. But it was not burned and was not the origin point of the fire. Part of my role as a fire investigator was also to determine whether there was evidence that the vehicle was stolen and stripped of parts before being burned. With the exception of the battery, the vehicle had generally not been stripped for parts typically sold or sought after in vehicle thefts, such as the radio, wheels, and lug nuts. I also observed the driver's side door lock was intact. I was unable to determine whether the key was present in the ignition. As I recall, the ignition area of the vehicle was severely damaged. Often in a vehicle fire, the ignition, which is typically made of aluminum and zinc, can completely melt, and I found a metal glob on the floor of the driver's area. I recall that being the case with this vehicle, making it not possible to determine whether the key was present. In my experience as a fire investigator, when a vehicle is intentionally set on fire, there are a number of typical motivations for doing so, including insurance purposes or, if the vehicle was involved in a crime, to dispose of evidence of that crime. I recall thinking that this vehicle fire appeared to be unusual and that the vehicle had not been stripped for parts. The radio and tires were intact, and the tires, which appeared to be matching and in reasonably good condition, were still on the vehicle. Additionally, our investigation later showed that the owner only had liability insurance on the vehicle, which indicated to me that a possible motivation for this vehicle fire was the disposal of evidence of a crime. Additionally, our investigation later showed that the owner only had liability insurance on the vehicle, which indicated to me that a possible motivation for this vehicle fire was the disposal of evidence of a crime. As part of my investigation into this vehicle fire, as indicated in my report, I produced photographs, scene diagrams, and a report. I recall producing a scene diagram in this case which depicted the location of the van, its orientation to the alleyway, and other objects within the alleyway. Typically, I would take my own scene photographs. Attached to my report are 2 sheets of 11 thumbnails of digital photographs I took at the scene. It was my practice to upload photographs to the department's database for storage. This case occurred around the department's transition from film photograph to digital photography. This case occurred around the department's transition from film photography to digital photography. During this transition, it was common for both digital and film photographs to be taken at the scene. I do not recall whether any film photographs of this scene were taken in addition to these digital photographs attached as thumbnails to my report. I recall that while on the scene, I requested the assistance of a CSO or community service officer to assist with processing the scene, but I was informed that none were available at the time. Subsequently, I made the determination to have the vehicle towed to a secure location for processing at a later date. I recall that as a part of my initial examination of the scene, I examined the interior of the van. I recall observing a burnt mattress in the rear of the van at that time. Situated on the mattress was a large metal can. I do not recall moving the metal canister located on top of the mattress at this time. Below is a photograph depicting the interior of the van. While at the scene, I wore my work gloves while handling any evidence. I do not recall collecting any evidence on December 25, 2002. Instead, to the best of my recollection, items such as the rag hanging from the fuel tank were secured inside the van while it was being towed to A&R Towing. I recall that we picked this specific tow yard because it was fenced in and under surveillance in order to protect the integrity of the vehicle, which was still under investigation. My initial report lists an individual named Mark F. as a name to appear in the report, but his name is not mentioned in the body of the report. I do not recall who this individual was or what his connection to the case was. Within a couple of days, I became aware of the missing person investigation for Laci Peterson. I became aware that the police were looking for information regarding a van associated with the burglary that occurred across the street from the Petersons' home around the time Laci Peterson was reported missing. When I heard this, I immediately thought about the van fire I had investigated on December 25th. I contacted Modesto Police Department Detective Shipley to conduct further investigation. And then this section is called Interview with Owner Terry Borden. On December 31st, 2002, I accompanied Detective Shipley to the business property of Terry Borden, the registered owner of the van. I recall there being several people present during the interview. Initially upon arrival, I recall the people there knew we were law enforcement and did not want to talk to us. I remember the Borden property being an intimidating place. I recall there being several men hanging around the property, and Detective Shipley informed me of the criminal history of some of the people associated with the property. I do not recall whether or how they identified themselves. I did not get the impression that they were all members of Borden's family. They also did not strike me as official employees, but instead, just sort of men that were hanging around the compound. I recall that while Detective Shipley was interviewing the owner, I was accompanied by another individual who showed me where the van should have been parked. I recall trying to determine how the vehicle could have been stolen from the property and thinking that someone would have to be an idiot to try and steal from the Borden property. I recall there being dogs on chains, and it was just all around an intimidating place. I recall Terry Borden indicating that he was not aware of a mattress being in the back of the van when it was last in his possession. Detective Shipley took the lead on taking witness statements. While I am aware that his report indicates that he conducted a search of an individual and his residence, I do not believe I was present for that search. This section is called Discovery of Stains on Mattress on December 31st, 2002, and it says, after interviewing the owner and obtaining a warrant to search the van, I accompanied Detective Shipley to the tow yard where the van had been stored. Modesto Police Department evidence technician Lovell might have also been present at the tow yard, but I do not specifically recall. To the best of my recollection, while at the tow yard, I entered the vehicle and removed the metal canister found on the mattress, and then discovered that there were red-brown stains on the unburned portion of the mattress. I recall feeling a sense of anxiety at seeing the stain, and I still get goosebumps now when I think about it. At this point, the search for Laci Peterson was at the forefront of everybody's minds, and discovering these stains on a burnt van found within hours of her disappearance was shocking. The stained mattress and metal canister are depicted below. Upon observing the stains, we decided to have the vehicle brought to the Modesto Police Department's evidence property locker for further processing. And this section is called Transporting and Processing a Van at Evidence Locker. Because the search for Laci Peterson was national news at this time, and because the police had released a statement indicating they were looking for a van related to a burglary across the street, we took extra precautions to avoid having the van spotted by the media while en route to the evidence locker. We covered the van with a tarp during transport and drove a route that avoided the media stalked out outside the police department, as indicated by the map below, and put the van in a warehouse with a closed door for further processing. Once at the evidence locker, I began processing the van. This was a more thorough processing than we had done at the tow yard. I recall digging out the floorboard of the van and removing the mattress materials. I believe some of the portions of the van were examined for fingerprint evidence, but none were located. I recall additional photographs of the processing of the van were taken at the evidence locker. I would have taken my own photographs, and I recall someone from MPD taking photos as well. I recall cutting 3 samples from the mattress fabric. To the best of my recollection, the portions I collected consisted of 2 small cuttings of stained areas and 1 control cutting of a non-stained area. I believe the stained samples I cut are the 2 small holes cut from the middle and the control sample I collected from the edge of the fabric, as indicated by the yellow circles in the photograph below. The attorneys I spoke to from the Los Angeles Innocence Project informed me that the photograph above was taken in 2019 in conjunction with testing that was conducted at that time, and that the letters A and B that are superimposed in the photo were placed onto the photo to indicate the areas where samples were collected for DNA testing in 2019. I believe separate photographs of the process of my cutting of samples from the mattress cloth in 2003 would also have been taken. To my recollection, I selected the stained samples from 2 areas where the staining appeared to be heaviest. Of the 2, I deliberately chose the heavier stained sample to be subjected to a presumptive test for blood to give the best chance of indicating whether blood was present. This sample was placed into a vial for presumptive testing. The vial turned blue, indicating a positive reaction for blood. The vial and the positive reaction of the presumptive test are depicted below. I am not sure what happened to the second sample cutting and the control cutting that I collected. It is my practice to wear gloves when entering a crime scene, including a burned vehicle. And to the best of my recollection, myself and the others processing the van wore gloves when we entered the vehicle and handled the vehicle therein. I recall that once the presumptive test indicated positive for blood, the face of the evidence technician conducting the test went white, and everyone present at the evidence locker went ballistic. The people observing the testing started getting on their phones to report what we had found. This was such a big deal that the police chief, city manager, and fire chief all came down to the evidence locker to view the evidence. At this point, the incendiary fire case had morphed into a missing person case, and its investigation was taken over by the Modesto Police Department. I recall personally taking the stained mattress fabric to be tested at the Department of Justice lab in Ripon. I recall that typically this lab was very busy. When we would submit evidence to test for presence of an accelerant in an arson case, we would sometimes have to wait over a year for results. I specifically recall taking the samples and handing them over to a woman that worked at the lab, who was also a volunteer firefighter in Ripon. I have reviewed the handwritten submission forms associated with this transaction. My name is spelled wrong, and the form incorrectly states that I was with the Modesto Police Department. These forms also incorrectly indicate that the sample was tested in front of me with a negative result for blood. I did not witness any testing conducted on the mattress samples while at the DOJ lab. I only dropped the sealed samples off and left. And this is his conclusion. He writes, I left the Modesto Fire Department not long after my involvement in this case. I agreed to talk about my observations and the evidence I collected and examined related to this vehicle fire, because I have been deeply troubled about what I viewed to be an insufficient investigation into the possibility of this vehicle fire being related in some way to the disappearance of Laci Peterson. In my opinion, given the presumptive positive test for blood on the mattress in the back of the van, which was found the morning after Laci Peterson's disappearance not far from her home, and which was intentionally set on fire, perhaps to conceal evidence of a crime, a much more in-depth investigation should have been conducted into who was responsible for the theft and the burning of the van. I have reviewed this declaration in its entirety, and under penalty of perjury pursuant to the laws of the state of California, that the foregoing is true and correct. This is getting more and more frustrating reading about. So Bryan says there were literally men standing around, white-faced, after this mattress tested presumptive positive for blood, and yet 20 years later we're all standing around listening to the lead investigator on the case claiming he had never heard about this van before. He was just on News Nation saying it was news to him. How is this possible?
It would be different, Mr. Bueller, if you knew about this van and hid that from the defense, but by all indications, this would be new information to you as well. What do you make of this van with the alleged human blood stain?
Chris, it is new information to me. I hadn't heard anything about this before, and if we missed it, that's on us. There's always a possibility we can miss things, and we do, but that's what the system is designed for.
I can't get past how they're trying to say they never heard of it. I just can't get past it. Not only does it completely go against this declaration by what Bryan said, who says the police were involved in the case, but it also looks ridiculous, even without Bryan's statement, that they wouldn't have known about something like this. It's just absolutely absurd. But see, what this does seem to align with is the same type of thing that Lieutenant Aponte claimed. As a professional, he handed over evidence to the Modesto Police Department, and suddenly it's either missing, ignored, or even worse, they claim they never heard about it. Let me repeat, you have a lieutenant saying he literally overheard someone stating there was a verbal altercation between Laci Peterson and Stephen Todd, one of the burglars. And now you have a Modesto fire investigator saying he handed over literal blood evidence to the Modesto Police Department. And the department claims they have no knowledge of either of these pieces of evidence or claims. To me, it's starting to become a pattern of either incompetence or it's being done on purpose. And personally, I don't know what's worse. I mean, the more I'm reading these declarations, the more I'm really interested in seeing how the court will rule on this. And the more I read the motion, the more my mind will be absolutely blown if the court does not grant the motion for a new trial. Because this is some crazy, crazy stuff, honestly. But that said, that is all I have for you today. You know I will keep you updated on any updates on this case, and please stay tuned for more. I think I'm going to do one more episode where I'll read declarations of witnesses who claim to have seen Laci after Scott left for the day. It's Homer Maldonado and Tony Freitas. So please like and subscribe if you found what you heard useful today at all. It truly helps our channel, and I'd be so grateful. Thank you all so much for watching. Be careful out there.